An empty coffin, and a stranger's chilling claim. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from tonight? Your comments always bring this mystery circle alive. Now, the story begins. It was a Thursday. Thursdays at the Brownstone usually mean boiled beef, no visitors, and Wolfe staying upstairs in the plant rooms long enough for Fritz to sneak in an extra splash of something Austrian into the consommé. Me? I was at my desk, going over the books, which is to say I was trying to find a distraction worthy of not going over the books, when the bell rang. Now this isn't a fairy tale. Our bell rings. Cabbies asking for Wolfe, messengers thinking we're the law office 3 blocks down, and once, a lady who wanted to borrow the yellow cookbook she saw in the window last Christmas. But the man standing in the vestibule that Thursday was not a cabbie, or a courier, or a lost reader of Escoffier. He was tall in the way that makes coat racks nervous, pale enough to be classified as waxwork, and so dry despite the rain that I thought he'd been ironed before arriving. "Mr. Wolfe," he said when I opened the door, "doesn't know me, but I believe I know something he'll want to hear." That right there is the kind of sentence that gets Wolfe's attention, if it's said with enough quiet and enough certainty. This one had both, and he didn't elaborate, which put him in a league with the Sphinx and the federal budget in terms of restraint. I brought him in. Not to the office. Wolfe doesn't receive strangers without vetting, but to the front room, where he stayed standing. He didn't remove his coat, didn't ask to sit, and didn't look at anything but the floor. His eyes were the kind that scanned caskets. "Name," I said. "Gerald Lang," he answered, though that won't matter to him. "Ah, humility and mystery in equal portions. What are you selling, Mr. Lang? Patent medicine, or just trouble?" "Neither," he said. "Something was taken, something valuable to a man now dead, and another man now wants to use it for himself." "Sounds thrilling," I said, "but unless you've got a name, a check, or a corpse, we don't usually engage in abstract art." That finally made him look up. He wasn't young, 40s maybe, but he had the kind of stillness that belongs to people who've waited a long time for something. I've seen it in widows, and once in a man who sat 3 years in a rented room expecting his brother to kill him. "I don't want to hire Mr. Wolfe," he said, "and I'm not here for help." Now that was new. People come to us to get out of something, indictments, blackmail, public shame, or the gnawing feeling they left the burner on. No one comes just to talk. "Then you're here for the scenery?" "I came," he said, "to tell Mr. Wolfe about the empty coffin in Edgemont Cemetery." He said it like a man offering a business card, like that one sentence contained everything. "And?" I asked. "That's all." I let the silence spool out a little. Silence is an underrated tool. Sometimes it gets people to fill it, and sometimes it tells you who they really are by how they treat it. Lang just stood there. I tried again. "You want Wolfe to investigate an empty coffin?" "Whose?" He shook his head once. "It's not whose. It's what's inside that matters. Or rather, what's not. Care to give us the address so we can take a peek?" "I'm not here to direct him," Lang said. "I'm here to warn him. Someone will come. A woman. She'll tell you a story. Parts of it will be true. Parts will be convincing, but none of it will help." He finally moved, just a hand into his coat, pulling out an envelope. "Give him this when she arrives. Not before. Not after. When she's here." The envelope was unsealed, cream-colored, and smelled faintly of dust and lavender. There was no name on it, just Wolfe's initials in small black ink. N.W. Before I could ask what he meant by "when she arrives," Lang had turned and was already at the door. I don't let people walk out of our house carrying riddles without at least a token protest, so I followed him to the stoop. Rain was tapping the leaves in the garden like a metronome. Lang didn't glance back. He moved down the stairs like a man who had nothing else to say and nothing left to want, I stayed at the door a few seconds longer. Then I shut it and took the envelope into the office. Wolfe was in his chair, naturally. Yellow pajamas, burgundy robe. Socks I wouldn't wear on a dare. His eyes were closed, not sleeping, never that at noon, but listening to the murmur of an old Brahms quartet playing softly from the shelf behind him. "Trouble," I said. He didn't open his eyes. "Nonsense. You're merely hungry. I just had a stranger in a raincoat tell me not to trust an invisible woman about an empty coffin. If that doesn't count as trouble, you've gotten picky." That got an eye open. One eye. Wolfe deals in single units when he's indulging me. I dropped the envelope on his desk. "He said to give you that only when the woman arrives. Not before. Not after." "Then you have erred, Archie." "Nope," I said, sitting, "because she's about to arrive." And sure enough, 3 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. She wasn't what I expected. Most women with secrets wear them in their posture or their perfume. This one wore tweed and trouble like a badge of office. Brown hair cut too short for fashion, lips too tight for pleasure, and eyes that said, "I'm here for business, not belief." "My name is Lydia Carew," she said. "I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe about a matter involving a family burial, a very private one, and a mistake that wasn't supposed to happen." When I took her coat and I slid the envelope from Wolfe's desk into my jacket. It was time. Time for Wolfe to get interested. The thing about Nero Wolfe is that he doesn't like being baited. It offends his sense of order, not to mention his pride. So when I escorted Lydia Carew into the office, and he opened both eyes at once, rare for mid-afternoon, especially with soup due in an hour, I knew two things. 1, he remembered the envelope. 2, he hated remembering it. She stood just inside the room, not moving forward, not sitting, not speaking. I'd seen more relaxed posture in a firing squad. Her eyes took in the orchid prints, the polished globe, and Wolfe's imposing presence like she was cross-checking it against whatever she'd imagined. "Miss Carew," I said, stepping aside. "This is Mr. Wolfe." She gave a nod that stopped short of anything warm. "Thank you for seeing me." "I have not yet," Wolfe said, his voice dry as yesterday's toast. "You are here. You may speak. But until you have spoken and I have listened, we are not engaged." She blinked at that. Not thrown, but definitely recalibrating. I stayed standing off to the side with the envelope burning a hole in my jacket like a live grenade. She hadn't lied yet. Not technically. But that was coming. I'd bet Fritz's lemon tart on it. "There's been a mistake," she began. "At Edgemont Cemetery. A coffin was buried 2 weeks ago under the Carew family plot, but this week my brother, David, had the grave reopened, for reasons of confirmation." Wolfe's eyebrows barely flicked. "And? It was empty," she said. "Empty? No remains. Nothing but the clothes, and a sealed envelope placed where the head would have rested." I glanced at Wolfe. No change in expression, but his fingers, those pudgy, capable things, had gone still. When he goes still, he's thinking. She continued. "The man supposed to be buried there was my father, Carlton Carew. He died 6 weeks ago." "Of what?" "Stroke. Complicated by diabetes. It was expected." Wolfe turned a hand upward, barely a twitch. "Expected does not mean accepted. Why did your brother have the coffin opened?" She hesitated. That one had weight behind it. "Because he received an anonymous note 3 days ago that said, 'You buried an empty box.'" "That," Wolfe murmured, "is certainly one way to provoke curiosity." She nodded tightly. "And then, 2 nights ago, someone broke into my father's study. We'd sealed it. He was a collector, rare manuscripts, antiques. Nothing was taken, but something was moved." "What?" "A ledger. An old one. It was on the center desk. We found it on the floor, open to a page marked in ink. 'Nothing is ever truly buried.' That line wasn't there before." Now that was the kind of detail Wolfe eats with a fork and knife. I saw his nostrils flare, not from exertion, but from scenting the shape of something. An idea, a possibility. She went on, now a little faster. David thinks it's just someone trying to discredit us. We're public. Our family's old money, her foundation, all that. But I don't think it's a prank. I think someone's trying to remind us of something. Something my father did. And you believe I can deduce what that is? Her chin lifted slightly. I believe you'll know how to interpret the clues, and how to deal with whoever wants to unsettle us. Wolfe closed his eyes. It was his version of a chess clock ticking over. I took the envelope from my jacket, walked it over, and laid it gently in front of him. A man named Gerald Lang came before her, I said. Said she'd come, said not to believe everything she said, and gave you this for the moment she arrived. Wolfe didn't touch it right away. He let it rest there a moment, like a threat or a challenge. Then he opened it. Inside was a single page. Plain white. Wolfe read it, said nothing, then handed it to me. I read it aloud. Lydia Carew will tell you a truth that hides a deeper lie. The man buried in that coffin never existed, not in the way they remember him. Ask her about Vienna. Airti torlairti but the Ade Miss Carew went pale. Not a little. The kind of pale that drains all the way down to the wrists. That's absurd, she said. Possibly, Wolfe murmured, but not yet provably. I was 13 in 1986. We lived in New York. Did your father go abroad? Her mouth twitched. Yes, business, Europe. Vienna. Her pause was 3 seconds too long. He may have. I don't know. Wolfe leaned back, which for him is the equivalent of a general repositioning artillery. Miss Carew, I'm disinclined to pursue falsehoods for sport. You have presented me with a puzzle, one that touches on identity, history, and manipulation. Before I consider accepting your case, I require clarity. I've told you the truth. No, Wolfe said calmly. You have told me your version of the truth. There is a distinction. She stood, not quickly, not rudely, but with an unmistakable signal. This was a woman who did not like being doubted. I could respect that, but Wolfe didn't flinch. I'll return tomorrow, she said tightly. If you decide the truth matters more than the delivery. She left her number, her card, and her scent, a sharp blend of lilac and smoke. I waited until the door shut behind her before turning to Wolfe. Well? She lied, he said. Sure. But about what? About what she believes. That is always more significant than lying about facts. I dropped back into my chair. You going to take the case? No. I waited. He sighed, glared at the envelope, then said, yes. And that was that. Fritz called from the hall to announce lunch, and Wolfe rose without another word, his robe trailing like Caesar going to Senate. I stayed behind to reread the note. Vienna, 1986. An empty coffin. A man who didn't exist. I didn't know what was buried or stolen or imagined, but I had the strong feeling that before this was over, we'd be digging a lot deeper than Edgemont Cemetery. And Gerald Lang. I had a hunch we hadn't seen the last of him. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I made sure to finish my eggs early. Fritz was trying out a new tarragon blend and had gone sentimental with the hollandaise. Normally, I'd linger for seconds, but today I had names to chase and gravestones to question, and Wolfe had given me marching orders before he even hit the orchids. Archie, he'd said as I came into the office after breakfast, you will visit the cemetery, confirm the absence, question the custodian, and obtain a list of all interments on that date. If the grave was disturbed, someone had to dig it. Find out who. Then, after a pause, also inquire whether the Carew family held a private ceremony, which meant he already suspected they had. I presume you're staying here to commune with the corpse, I muttered. Wolfe opened a book and didn't respond, which in our little ecosystem was the equivalent of a nod. Edgemont Cemetery sat out in Westchester. 40 minutes of traffic, one toll booth, and more angels per acre than St. Peter's filing cabinet. I pulled up to the gates around 10:30 and introduced myself to a man named Gideon Frost, the grounds superintendent, who looked like he'd never met a crime that couldn't be mowed around. "Carew plot?" he said, pushing his cap back. "Oh, sure. Section D, bit of a stir lately." "Stir?" He scratched his beard. "They opened up the father's grave again, quietly, but folks talk. Said it was for confirmation of remains." Fancy way of saying someone thought the box was empty. I tried my luck. "Was it?" He gave me a look. "Wouldn't be my place to say. I just keep the lawn level and the birds off the cherubs. But I'll say this. Whatever they found, they didn't call the police." That was useful. No law enforcement, no official record. So the Carews wanted this contained, or buried again. I made a mental note. Who handled the digging? Private contractor. The Carews brought their own crew. Wouldn't let any of us near it. Had 2 men and a priest there too. "A priest?" He nodded. "Father Gorman, local parish. But he didn't stay long. Said something about desecration, then left in a huff." "Who arranged the original burial?" "Same. Private crew, private hearse. No public listing. I didn't see the casket arrive. Just showed up that morning, like it was dropped in overnight." That was starting to smell off. Too many secrets for a plain old stroke and box routine. I thanked Frost, then swung by the rectory and caught Father Gorman between sacraments. He was a pinched little man with kind hands and a voice that held more doubt than doctrine. "I agreed to attend as a courtesy," he said when I mentioned the exhumation. "Lydia Carew asked me personally, but I wasn't told the purpose. When I arrived and saw what they were doing, it felt wrong, not illegal, but morally perverse." "How so?" He looked down at his fingers. "It wasn't grief. It was something else, like they were hoping to find the box empty." "Did they?" He looked up sharply. "Mr. Goodwin, you must understand. The soul leaves the body. But when a family gathers around an empty coffin and nobody is surprised, that is a different kind of death." That didn't clear much up, but it did make for a hell of a line. Back in the car, I made a couple of calls. One to Lon Cohen at the Gazette, who owed me for not reporting a certain soiree photo to his wife, and one to Saul Panzer, who didn't owe me anything but operated on a strict you-scratch-I-snoop basis. I gave Saul the name Gerald Lang and the date. Vienna, 1986. Told him to dig. Carefully. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe had returned from the orchids and was entrenched in his chair, hands folded on the globe of his stomach like he was hatching something. I gave him the rundown. "Empty grave," I said. "Hushed funeral. Private crew. No city record. The priest says the family expected it to be empty." He grunted. "Expected or arranged?" I shrugged. Could go either way. Saul's on Lang. Lon's checking obits and press clips on the Carews. But get this, Carlton Carew, the dearly not departed, never had a death certificate filed in New York or anywhere else in the state. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Preposterous. No record of hospital admission, no attending physician, no official declaration. Just a private death in a private home with a private interment, which no one witnessed save for family. "And Lang," I added. "He knew. He practically gift-wrapped the deception for you." Wolfe frowned. "Not quite," he hinted. "He obscured more than he revealed." "So what's his angle?" "That," Wolfe said, "is what we must uncover. He is either a manipulator or a whistleblower. Possibly both. Possibly neither." I reached for my notepad. "Wolfe, there's something else. Lydia Carew hesitated when I asked her about Vienna. I'd bet my rent she knew exactly what happened there. She was 13. Sure. But she remembered. Wolfe looked thoughtful. And Lang wants us to remember too. Just then, the doorbell rang. I went, half hoping it was Fritz with a rogue soufflé, but it was Lydia Carew. Again, no appointment, no call. This time, she looked different. Less polished, like she'd slept in her worry and forgotten to iron it out. I'm not staying long, she said, but I wanted you to know something. Wolfe gestured toward the chair opposite him. She didn't sit. My father wasn't always called Carlton Carew, she said. He changed it in 1987, the year after. Vienna. His real name was Elias Kruger. I heard Wolfe suck in a breath, just barely. He knew the name. I didn't, but I'd learn it soon. He left Europe under a cloud, she continued. There was an incident. A man died. My father was cleared, but there were questions, so we moved. New name, new country, new life. Yet someone has not forgotten, Wolfe said. She nodded. And Lang? I don't know him, but I think he was there, in Vienna. I think he saw something. Wolfe laced his fingers. Then we must consider two possibilities. Either your father staged his death to escape a resurging threat, or someone has manufactured this tale to expose a man already buried. She looked away. My father wasn't a good man, Mr. Wolfe, but he was mine. If he faked it, I want to know why. If someone stole him, I want to know who. Wolfe nodded once. She turned to leave, but paused at the threshold. Mr. Wolfe, she said, you still have that envelope? I do. If you read between the lines, tell me what's written there. Then she was gone. Wolfe didn't speak. He just sat very still, his head tilted slightly as if listening to a sound that hadn't reached the rest of us yet. I looked at the note again. Just one line stood out this time, bold as brass in my brain. The man buried in that coffin never existed, not in the way they remember him. I had a feeling that by the time this was over, the same could be said for a few more people. And maybe one of them was still walking. That afternoon I made myself useful. Or as useful as you can be in a case where the corpse is allegedly imaginary, and the suspect might have changed his name, address, country, and entire moral compass 38 years ago. Wolfe remained anchored in his chair, chewing mental cud over the names Kruger and Carew, while I hit the phones. The thing about names is, when they're changed to hide something, there's always a seam left somewhere in the stitching. My job was to find it. Lon Cohen came through first. I heard his voice crackling over the line from the Gazette office, like he was still holding a cigarette with 2 fingers and a grudge in his throat. Elias Kruger, he said. Now that's a ghost I haven't heard in years. Start talking. He was big in the European antiquities scene, ran a consultancy that worked with museums in Austria and Germany, but the real story was the private clients. Smuggling charges got whispered more than once. And Vienna, 1986. That's the year a certain Czech art broker turned up dead. Fell down a hotel stairwell, but some folks said he was pushed. Kruger was staying 2 floors up, questioned but never charged. Next thing anyone knew, he vanished. Then shows up in Manhattan as Carlton Carew. Wouldn't surprise me. He had money, connections. Smart man, bad smell. I'm emailing you 2 clippings. One's a profile from 1985. The other's a gossip column post-disappearance. You'll see the pattern. I thanked him and hung up just in time for Saul Panzer to call in. Saul never wastes time with pleasantries, which is part of his charm. Got him, he said. Lang was in Vienna in '86. Junior staff at the American consulate. Had a minor run-in with Kruger over an authentication dispute. Apparently, Kruger tried to export a forged manuscript under diplomatic guise. Lang flagged it. Internal records only. Lang's a whistleblower. or a guy with a score to settle. What else? He's in New York now, lives in a rent-controlled building in Morningside Heights. Keeps to himself. Never married. No priors. No records after 91. You want me to pay him a visit? Number, not yet, but stay close. I hung up and stared out the window. We had an empty coffin, a false identity, a daughter with a conscience, and a man who knew too much about something most people forgot on purpose. Which left one question: if Carlton Carew really was Elias Kruger, and if he faked his death, where the hell was he now? Wolfe was watching me when I walked back in. Not just with the usual disdain, but with that special brand of interest he saves for ideas that don't line up. You have something, he said. Plenty. You want it in order of age, guilt, or geography? Start with Lang. I told him everything Saul dug up. Wolfe nodded along slowly, then held out a hand for the clippings. I passed them over. He read the first, then tapped the second. This, he said, is not about antiquities. This is about legacy. The man buried in that coffin is not the man Lydia Carew remembers, because she never knew who he was to begin with. She remembers a father. She remembers a construct, a man rebuilt for American respectability, but Kruger's past was never resolved, merely postponed. I sat down, flipping my notebook open. So Lang resurfaces because he believes Kruger escaped justice. More likely, Wolfe said, because he believes Kruger intends to escape it again. And Lydia? She is caught between illusion and loyalty, which makes her vulnerable to either. I leaned back. You think her father's still alive? Wolfe gave me one of those glances that feels like a microscope being adjusted. I think someone wants us to believe he is. I was about to push when the phone rang. I picked it up. Nero Wolfe's residence. Archie? It was Lydia, and her voice had that crackling edge that people get when something precious has been stolen or returned in the wrong condition. Someone broke into the study again. When? Just now. While I was out meeting with a trustee. I got home and found the same ledger, the one I mentioned, missing this time. Gone completely. And someone left a note. What did it say? 2 words. Too late. That was enough to get me moving. I told Wolfe, who barely raised an eyebrow, and then made tracks uptown. When I arrived at the Carew house, a brownstone so neatly kept it looked like a museum for restraint. Lydia was waiting on the stoop, arms folded, face drawn. She brought me inside and led me to the study. Whoever had come in hadn't ransacked anything. No drawers overturned, no mess. Just the one missing book, and a faint smell of cloves. I didn't call the police, she said. I thought you'd want to see it first. I checked the windows. Locked from inside. No scratches on the latch. Someone had a key or a very cooperative locksmith. You said it was a ledger, I asked. Old? Yes, from his European days. I think that's why they wanted it. Do you remember what was in it? Mostly names. Transactions. Initials I didn't recognize. But you didn't mention it when you first came to Wolfe. Her jaw set. Because I didn't think it mattered. I thought this was about a grave mistake, not espionage or theft. It's always about both, I said. I took a few quick photos of the shelves, then of the note. Plain white paper. Typewritten. Too late. No signature, no fingerprints. Just a quiet promise that someone was keeping ahead. On my way out, I checked the front door. There were tiny scratches near the deadbolt. Not forced entry, more like careful picking. Professional. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without interrupting, then reached for the red phone and called Saul. Mr. Panzer, he said, we require eyes on the Carew property. Tonight, quietly. Someone believes they have concluded this story. I wish to see what their next act entails. Then he rang off and looked at me. Archie, bring Miss Carew here tomorrow morning at 10. She will be disinclined, but insist. Why? Because she must hear what we now know from her own mouth. I didn't ask what he meant by that, because I had a feeling Wolfe was about to find out just how much Lydia Carew really remembered about Vienna, and how much of it had never made it into the coffin. At 9:59 the next morning, Lydia Carew walked into the office like someone who had stopped expecting truth to make anything better. She wore the same tweed coat, a shade more wrinkled, and carried a small envelope clutched in her left hand, like she hadn't dared let go of it since sunrise. Fritz had just wheeled Wolfe's breakfast tray out when I brought her in. Wolfe was seated, freshly shaven, in a crisp canary-yellow shirt that he only wore when he expected confrontation or brilliance, sometimes both. "Miss Carew," Wolfe said without looking up from a slip of paper, "you are punctual. That is a rare form of honesty." "I didn't come for praise," she said, glancing once at me before settling into the red chair. "Few do," Wolfe murmured, "but those who deserve it often refuse it." She reached into her coat and handed me the envelope. "This arrived at my doorstep this morning. No name, no stamp. Just slid under the door." I passed it to Wolfe, who opened it with the care of a man unwrapping explosives. Inside was a single sheet again, typed. Wolfe read it once, twice, then passed it back to me. The words were short, sharp, and cold. "You should have left the past buried. Now they'll dig up yours." Wolfe looked at her. "You are being warned, not threatened. That is a subtle but crucial difference." She stiffened. "And what's the difference to you, Mr. Wolfe?" "A threat implies leverage. A warning implies knowledge. Someone believes you still possess something valuable, if not materially, then as memory. What did you see, Miss Carew, in Vienna?" "I told you," she said. "I was 13. I stayed in the hotel. My father had meetings." Wolfe's tone didn't change. "And did one of those meetings end with a man at the bottom of a staircase?" She didn't answer right away. I could see it in her, the fight between silence and self-preservation. When she did speak, it came with effort. "There was shouting," she said. "I remember that. And a smell, like heated metal and cologne. My father came back late that night with blood on his sleeve. He said he slipped helping someone on the street. I believed him." "You still do?" I asked. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know what was true anymore." Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. "Then allow me to tell you what is." The room settled into the kind of hush that only Wolfe can engineer. His voice was low but firm, like a teacher presenting unpleasant facts to a promising but lazy student. "Elias Kruger, your father, was involved in illicit art transactions. He used museum contracts as cover to traffic rare manuscripts out of Eastern Europe during the Cold War. He was careful, methodical, and almost never seen. But in 1986, he made a mistake. He tried to pass a forged 16th-century herbal compendium through diplomatic channels, under the protection of an American consulate official." "Lang," she said, eyes widening. "Yes," Wolfe nodded. Lang flagged it, quietly. Your father confronted him, privately, I presume. But that confrontation was overheard by a third man, Pavel Neumann, a Czech broker already in the crosshairs of several governments. That night, Neumann fell down the stairs of the Hotel Löwenstein and died of a fractured skull. There were no witnesses, but your father left Vienna within 24 hours. Lang stayed silent. Until now. Lydia's hands were trembling. "How do you know this?" "Because the ledger that was stolen from your home last night had a code. Your father used initials for each transaction, but there were margin notes added later. One of them was LG-Vienna, November 1986. She looked at me. "You said the ledger was gone." "It is," I told her. "But I took photos before I left." She leaned forward, and I saw something shift in her, an old anger clawing its way up through grief. "You're saying this man, Lang, is trying to punish my father posthumously?" "No," Wolfe said. "He's trying to prevent your father from escaping again." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Wolfe said evenly, "that your father is not dead." She froze. "That's impossible." "No," Wolfe said. "It's inconvenient, but not impossible. The coffin was empty. The funeral was private. The cause of death was unregistered, and Lang knew where to direct me before you arrived." "But why?" Her voice was thin. "Why fake his death?" "Because someone was getting too close," I said. "Lang, maybe others. Your father needed a clean escape. Dying provided it." She slumped back in the chair, staring at nothing. Wolfe folded his hands. "Which brings us to a pressing concern. Who then has the ledger? Who broke in not once, but twice, and left warnings?" She blinked. "You think it wasn't Lang?" "Lang would have sent a message, not a cryptic threat. Whoever took the ledger wanted to delay or derail our progress, which means they're either protecting your father or hoping to use him. Use him how? Blackmail. Leverage. Reopening closed wounds with fresh dirt." There was a knock on the door. I opened it, and Saul Panza stepped in. His jacket was damp with sleet, his face unreadable. "I found him," he said. Wolfe didn't react. He never reacts when it matters most. "Where?" I asked. "Rural Connecticut. Small cottage near Ridgefield. Goes by Carl Emery. The property is leased through 2 dummy corporations, but I caught a glimpse. It's him?" Lydia's hand flew to her mouth. Wolfe nodded once. "Well done, Mr. Panza. Should I approach?" "No," Wolfe said. "Let him sweat. We need to invite him here. On our terms." I looked at Wolfe. "You're going to ask a dead man to tea?" "No," Wolfe said, eyes gleaming. "I'm going to summon him with the only thing he fears more than discovery, his daughter's disappointment." Lydia closed her eyes. I didn't know if she was bracing for impact or choosing it. Wolfe picked up the phone. "Get me Inspector Kramer," he said. Things were about to shift. You could feel it. The kind of shift that came not from violence, but from revelation. And if Wolfe was right, the next knock on the brownstone door wouldn't be from a client. It would be from a ghost. Kramer didn't arrive with sirens or backup. He came alone, wearing a tan trench coat that looked like it had been slept in, his cigar clamped between his teeth with the same grim commitment he applied to warrants. Fritz had barely cleared away the lunchtime dishes when I opened the door to let him in. "Wolfe," he said, brushing past me and straight into the office, "if this is another one of your philosopher-in-a-cave routines, I'm walking back out." Wolfe was seated, naturally, with a copy of Pliny. The younger opened on the stand beside him. He didn't rise. He didn't even adjust his weight. "I have summoned you, Mr. Kramer," he said evenly, "because a man presumed dead is not only alive, but possibly implicated in international art fraud and the falsification of a federal death certificate. I thought you might be interested." Kramer let out a breath that sounded like it had fought its way up from his boots. "Do you have proof?" "I have an eyewitness," Wolfe said, "and circumstantial evidence which you may interpret with your usual flair for obstruction." Kramer turned to me. "Translation," I filled him in. "The empty coffin, the alias in Connecticut, the missing ledger and the resurrected name of Elias Kruger." I gave it straight, leaving out the dramatic pauses Wolfe favored. When I was done, Kramer looked at Wolfe and narrowed his eyes. "You telling me this guy faked a whole death ceremony?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "and did so to escape a reckoning, one that's now come knocking." Kramer muttered something about paperwork and pulled out a small notepad. "And the daughter?" "She's here," I said. "She knows. She didn't before, but she does now." "You're sure this guy's still in the country?" "Saul saw him yesterday," I said. "Same face, same walk, different name, hiding in plain sight. Wolfe gestured toward the globe on his desk and gave it a slow spin with one finger. "Mr. Kruger, alias Carew, will be invited here," he said. "Voluntarily. If he refuses, then your jurisdiction may become necessary." Kramer snorted. "You're really going to send a letter to a guy who dug his own grave and ask him to tea?" Wolfe didn't flinch. "Not tea. Confrontation. I'm extending the dignity of choice before the law removes it." "I'll give you 2 days," Kramer said. "Then I want an address, fingerprints, and a statement." "Agreed." Kramer turned toward me. "If this goes sideways, I'm blaming you." "You always do," I said. He left with the grace of a tired bull, and I could hear him grumbling all the way to the sidewalk. Wolfe watched the door for a full 10 seconds after it closed, then reached into the drawer for a sheet of his personal stationery. It was cream-colored, heavy, and carried a faint whiff of clove and dust, probably from his drawer full of envelopes no one else was allowed to touch. "Archie," he said, "take this down." I did. "Mr. Carew, you're invited to attend a private conversation at my residence. The subject concerns your identity, your family's legacy, and the ledger recently removed from your study. If you decline, I shall forward the contents of this letter and a dossier of recent findings to the district attorney. If you accept, come alone. 11 a.m. tomorrow. Nero Wolfe. I typed it up, sealed it, and handed it off to Saul, who'd been waiting in the hallway like a well-dressed shadow. He took it with a nod and vanished. The rest of the day passed slowly. Lydia stayed in the upstairs, guest room, reading and not asking questions. Wolfe made no further moves. He preferred stillness before a storm. I did some background work, revisiting Kruger's name in half a dozen European archives. Lon Cohen sent over a scanned news clipping from Vienna's Kronen Zeitung that confirmed Kruger had been considered a person of interest in Neumann's death, but the investigation had been quashed, probably diplomatically. By the time the dinner bell rang, the house felt tighter than usual. Fritz served osso buco with risotto Milanese, but the only conversation at the table was a comment from Wolfe about the inferior saffron stocks lately. Lydia didn't come down. After dinner, Wolfe and I convened in the office. The fire was crackling. I had a bourbon in hand. Wolfe had his brandy and a faint scowl. "You think he'll come?" I asked. "Yes, even though he's managed to vanish for nearly 4 decades. That is precisely why he'll come. Men who spend their lives running develop an obsession with control. They wish to dictate the terms of exposure. I'm offering him that." I nodded. "And if he doesn't, then Mr. Kramer will have his corpse after all." I didn't ask whether Wolfe meant that literally. Sometimes you don't want to know what the man has planned behind those enormous eyelids. At 10:45 the next morning, I checked the vestibule for the 3rd time and returned to the office. Wolfe hadn't moved, though he had changed his shirt to a dark blue one he saves for guests of ambiguous moral value. At 10:59, the bell rang. I opened the door. The man standing there looked tired in the way people only do when they've lived under different names for too long. His hair was gray, his jaw was tight, and his eyes were Lydia's. He wore a simple wool coat and held a hat in one hand. There was nothing performative in him. He knew exactly what this was. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, stepping inside, "I assume you know who I am." "I do," Wolfe said. "Though I confess, your performance has been more convincing than most." He sat where Lydia had sat, facing Wolfe with a stillness that felt rehearsed. "You have leverage," he said. "I understand that." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Is that all you understand?" Kruger's jaw tightened. "I did what I had to. The past was poison. I had a daughter to protect." "You had yourself to protect," Wolfe corrected. "Lydia was an accessory to your deception. She was not protected. She was erased. Kruger closed his eyes. Then say what you brought me here to say. Wolfe leaned slightly forward. The ledger is gone, but not lost. The man who took it, who left warnings at your daughter's home, did not act alone. This is not about justice. It's about leverage. Someone wants to use your false death as currency, against you or against your daughter. Kruger didn't flinch. Lang. No, Wolfe said. Lang alerted me. He did not rob your house. Whoever did knew the ledger's placement, knew your habits. Kruger hesitated. There's one other, he said slowly. A man named Drexler. He worked with me in Austria, helped arrange some of the quieter shipments. When I pulled out, I cut him off. Last I heard, he was still operating out of Prague. Operating in what sense? I asked. Kruger looked at me. Blackmail, acquisition, art as leverage. I turned to Wolfe. You think he's here? I think he wants to be, Wolfe said. And he wants an asset, either the ledger or you. Kruger didn't move. I won't let him near Lydia, he said quietly. She's already near, Wolfe replied. The question is how close he plans to get. Outside, the street was quiet, but in the brownstone, the trap had been set. We weren't chasing ghosts anymore. We were baiting one. Wolfe didn't speak for a moment after Kruger, Carlton Carew, if you still wanted to call him that, delivered the name Drexler. That meant he was calculating, filing pieces into new patterns behind that heavy-lidded stare of his. I've seen him solve murders with less. But this was a different kind of case. More shadows than bodies. More truth buried under silence than under dirt. Kruger sat rigidly, eyes pinned to the carpet like he didn't trust the air to carry what he might say next. When he finally looked up, it wasn't at Wolfe. It was at me. Drexler was clever, he said. He knew how to disappear before I ever did. He was the one who taught me about shell companies, about how to register a burial plot under a foundation's name without leaving a trace. I used everything he taught me to escape him. Wolfe grunted. And you presumed that made you safe? I presumed I could protect my daughter. That was the only thing I cared about. No, Wolfe said, his voice low and precise. You cared about being forgotten, not forgiveness, not justice. Oblivion, Kruger's shoulders dropped half an inch. For him, that probably counted as a confession. I asked, why now? Why come out of hiding for Wolfe's summons after all this time? Kruger turned slightly in his chair, because Drexler's handwriting was on the second note. I blinked. You recognized it. Yes. He used to send invoices in script, old-fashioned, meticulous. The word buried was curved in the same way. He's here. Watching. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Then we must assume he has been close for some time. Close enough to follow your daughter, close enough to wait for you to surface. That thought hung in the room like a cold draft. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, you will collect Miss Carew from the guest room and bring her here. She must hear this now, before events overtake understanding. I went, and I didn't have to knock. Lydia was already at the top of the stairs, hand on the railing like she'd been waiting for the words to drift up through the house. She came down quietly. I saw the moment she entered the office and saw her father, really saw him, as though her memory had been waiting to reconcile itself with reality. He stood. Lydia. Don't, she said. There was no anger in it, just finality. She took a seat without looking at him. Wolfe addressed her, not gently, but not unkindly. Your father has confirmed that a man named Drexler may be the orchestrator behind the theft in the notes. He was once a business associate, a manipulator and opportunist. He knows your father's secrets, and therefore your family's weakness. She nodded once. So what happens now? We make him reveal himself. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, You will place a call to Lon Cohen. There will be a short piece in tomorrow's Gazette Society column. Something brief but noteworthy. Mr. Carlton Carew, once believed deceased, has returned for a private family matter and will be speaking at a closed Carew Foundation event in Manhattan. Attendance by invitation only. I raised a brow. You want to announce that the dead are rising for a gala? Yes, Wolfe said, almost indulgently. Because if Drexler is here, he will not allow that return to go uncontested. He will act, either by approaching Mr. Carew or by eliminating the Ledger's perceived threat. I turned to Kruger. You're okay being the bait? He gave me a grim look. I've been a ghost for 37 years. Time I let someone else haunt me for a change. That night, the brownstone stayed locked down. Saul returned to coordinate. Fred Durkin and Ori Cather were stationed at points outside. Lydia stayed in the guest room. Kruger remained in the second-floor study, where Wolfe had insisted he be placed, not out of kindness, but out of sight lines. Wolfe abhors drama, but he'll engineer it like a maestro when needed. The next morning, Lon delivered. The article was placed exactly as instructed. A small, quiet blurb beneath a museum luncheon announcement. The reclusive Carlton Carew, long absent from public life, is set to appear briefly at a private Carew Foundation event later this week in Manhattan. Sources indicate the matter involves a family legacy matter previously unresolved. The Foundation declined further comment. It was perfect. Subtle enough to avoid a feeding frenzy, loud enough to be heard by the right ears. At 11 that morning, Fritz brought coffee to the office. I took mine black. Wolfe took his the same way he takes threats, with precise distaste and a wafer of stubbornness on the side. The knock came at 11:40. Not the doorbell. A knock. Intentional. Measured. Wolfe nodded at me once. I opened the door. He was tall, lean and precise, in a coat that looked like it hadn't been brushed against a stranger in a decade. Thin wire glasses. A pale blue scarf. The kind of man you don't remember until something goes missing. He gave me a brief smile, but his eyes didn't smile with it. "Mr. Wolfe is expecting me," he said in a faint accent. Swiss or Czech, I wasn't sure. "Name?" "Drexler." I let him in. Saul was already upstairs watching from the landing. Ori was outside with a camera. Fred was near the alley. Wolfe didn't rise, just nodded toward the chair. "Mr. Drexler." Drexler sat. No hesitation. "You've made yourself scarce," Wolfe said. "That is my nature. You have left notes. That is not." Drexler gave the smallest of smiles. I assumed the truth needed coaxing. "And what truth is that?" "That Carlton Carew is not who he says he is." "He is now," Wolfe said. "The law may choose otherwise soon, but you are not here for legal matters. You are here for leverage." "What do you want?" Drexler spread his hands. "Only recognition. If Mr. Kruger is returning, I wish to be acknowledged. You wish to be paid." A shrug. Wolfe looked at me. "Archie." I stepped out, crossed the hallway, opened the door to the study. Kruger stood at the window. "He's here," I said. "Ready?" He didn't answer, just walked past me. When he stepped into the office, Drexler stood as well. They regarded each other like twin ghosts caught in opposite mirrors. Kruger said, "You've made your point." Drexler tilted his head. "It was never about you. It was about what you left behind." Lydia stepped in behind him. "You mean me?" she asked. That did it. Drexler flinched, not outwardly, but I saw it. His mask slipped a quarter-inch. She stepped closer. "If you want money, say it. If you want silence, ask for it. But if you think you'll get either by threatening the dead or chasing the living, you've misunderstood the Carew legacy." Drexler looked at Wolfe. "This is your theater." "No," Wolfe said. "This is your confession. You attempted blackmail. You entered a private residence. You removed documents from a sealed estate. I now have 4 witnesses, a photograph of you arriving, and a recording." He gestured toward the globe. A wire glinted near the base. Drexler blinked. This was a trap. "Of course," Wolfe said, "but one you willingly walked into." Drexler rose. "This isn't over." "It is," Wolfe said. "Kramer will be here shortly." Drexler didn't argue. He walked out under Fred's watch, head held high, but the game was up. I closed the door behind him and looked at Kruger. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but like the mask had finally slipped and there was nothing left to hide behind. Lydia didn't speak. She just sat again, calm now. Not satisfied, not healed, but calm. Wolfe looked at her. "You now have the truth," he said. "Do with it what your father never did." She nodded once, and for the first time in days, the brownstone was quiet. It wasn't over, not really. Kramer came an hour later, jaw set, coat wet from sleet, cigar unlit for months. He marched into the office like a man arriving late to a war but determined to supervise the cleanup. Wolfe didn't rise to meet him. Lydia and her father were seated quietly on opposite sides of the room, both with the pale, contemplative look of people who just sat through the reading of an unflattering will. Kramer didn't sit. He stood with both feet planted like roots and looked at Wolfe. "Well?" Wolfe gestured toward the small side table where a typed transcript of Drexler's recorded remarks sat neatly bound. "He confessed to blackmail," Wolfe said, "to unauthorized entry and to possession of stolen property connected to a falsified identity. You may proceed." Kramer flipped through the transcript with a sour face, muttering as he scanned it. When he finished, he looked at Wolfe with something between approval and resentment. "You always get them to talk," he said, "even the ones who say nothing." "Because they wish to be heard," Wolfe replied. "Even liars long for recognition." Kramer grunted and turned to Kruger. "You know I'm going to have to process this," he said. "There's no statute of limitations on falsifying official death records when federal paperwork's involved." "I understand," Kruger said, quiet and firm. "But you're not my priority. Drexler's the rot. He'll talk more inside, and when he does, if any of those artifacts you two moved in the 80s ended up stateside, I'll find them." "I hope you do," Kruger said. "Maybe then it's worth something." Kramer gave him a strange look, half contempt, half tired acknowledgement, then waved the transcript and left, with Saul tailing close behind to make sure Drexler was handled properly. It wasn't the law Wolfe respected. It was Kramer's consistent irritation in the face of success. I poured myself a drink and leaned on the edge of the desk. Wolfe was silent, eyes half closed, which meant he was about to offer a final analysis, or a recipe correction, depending on how the mood landed. Kruger stood. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, voice dry but resolute, "I have little left to offer, but if there's any way I can reimburse you—" "No," Wolfe said sharply. "I will not be paid by a man who staged his own interment and allowed his daughter to mourn him while living under his roof." Kruger stiffened. Wolfe went on, his tone lowering. "You did not fake death to protect her. You faked it to preserve an illusion of control. You used her grief to shield yourself from the consequences of a life improperly lived." Kruger's mouth pressed shut. Lydia said nothing. "You were clever, Mr. Kruger," Wolfe continued, "but not wise. Wisdom would have told you that the past cannot be buried. It ferments, and when it surfaces, it poisons more than just the guilty." The silence after that was long. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't comfortable either. Lydia finally looked up. "I'll take him. Back with me," she said. "To the house. We'll speak. Or we won't, but I'll decide that, not him." Wolfe gave a shallow nod, which in his language meant complete approval. I walked them to the door. Kruger didn't offer a handshake. Lydia did. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing the truth into the room. It's what we do, I said, then offered her a faint smile. Even when it refuses to wear a tie. They left together, down the steps into a sky beginning to turn the pale blue that comes just before real winter sets in. I stood in the doorway for a moment, then closed it behind them. Back in the office, Wolfe was reaching for the bell cord. Fritz appeared like he'd been waiting since the war for the signal. "Lunch?" Wolfe said. Fritz nodded and vanished. I didn't sit yet. I stayed near the window. "That was a strange one," I said. "No body. No client, not really. Just a ledger, a lie, and a man too afraid to die properly." Wolfe didn't reply. I glanced over. He was reaching for his brandy, but paused before sipping. "Archie," he said, "you must understand. Most mysteries do not end with justice. They end with revelation. The world resumes with knowledge, not closure." "I still like it better when someone ends up in handcuffs," he grunted. "Then consider yourself sated. Mr. Drexler is presently in them, and Mr. Kruger walks back into the world, a man stripped of everything but truth. That is punishment enough." I nodded slowly. "You think Lydia will forgive him?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that forgiveness, like justice, is not always deserved, but it is often necessary for the innocent to continue." The fire cracked softly behind us. I finally sat, poured myself another inch of bourbon, and reached for the notepad I hadn't touched since the day Lang arrived. I flipped back to the beginning. His name, his warning, his envelope. "He never came back," I said. "Lang." "No," Wolfe said. "He did not need to. He set the match and let it burn." "He knew Drexler was close." "Yes, and wanted us to expose him. Or wanted Lydia to know," Wolfe said. "To force her father into the light, to make the silence end." I thought about that, about how Lang had said so little, had appeared and vanished with nothing but an envelope and a sentence, and how it had been enough to unravel decades. "You think he was part of it?" I asked. "In Vienna, I mean." "No," Wolfe said. "I think he was a witness who never got to speak, and finally chose the right ears." The house fell quiet. Fritz called from the dining room. The soup course would be cooling. Wolfe heaved himself up, groaned softly, and made for the door. I followed. Outside, somewhere across the city, a man was learning to be real again, and a woman who once mourned her father was deciding whether he still belonged in her life. That wasn't our problem anymore. Ours was roast duck and braised red cabbage. But as we crossed into the hall, Wolfe stopped and said, almost to himself, "Empty coffins are not the strange part, Archie. It's the men who willingly crawl into them and hope no one ever lifts the lid." And then he disappeared into the dining room. I followed, notebook still open, because someone had to write it down. That evening, the brownstone regained its usual hush, the kind that settles only after Wolfe has won, when the city has moved one more secret into its rearview mirror. Fritz cleared the dishes without comment. Wolfe grunted a grudging compliment about the duck, and I didn't feel like pressing him for a round of verbal badminton. Some cases leave you hollow in odd places. This one had done its carving slowly, like a spoon scraping out the inside of a clock. Around 8, I went up to my room to finish the report for Kramer. Just the clean version, with enough clarity to satisfy a prosecutor, but none of the sharp edges that Wolfe preferred to keep in his own private vault. Drexler's arrest had been smooth. Kramer had put him on ice before the ink on Wolfe's transcript could dry, and last I heard, the feds were circling like gulls around a thawing fish truck. But what lingered wasn't Drexler. It was Lydia. She hadn't called, hadn't written, not that we expected her to. Wolfe hadn't said a word about her since she left, and I wasn't going to be the one to start peeling open that particular can of sentiment. Still, something about the look she gave me at the door had stuck, like she was walking away from 2 funerals, one actual, one metaphorical, and neither had been properly buried. Around 9:30, the doorbell rang. Not many people risk that hour with Wolfe unless they're drunk, desperate or dying. I left my desk, went downstairs and opened the door. It was Gerald Lang. Same tall frame, same tan coat, a little more wear in the collar and the faintest scent of tobacco clinging to the wool, like a memory someone else left behind. His eyes hadn't changed. Still quiet. Still watching. "I don't need to come in," he said. "You're already here," I replied, stepping aside. He entered like a man unsure of how long a welcome lasts. I brought him into the office. Wolfe was in his chair, reading a French botanical journal he pretended not to despise. He looked up once, saw Lang, and closed the book with a soft thud. "You did not return for applause," Wolfe said. "No," Lang replied. "I returned because something's unfinished." "Explain." Lang took the red chair, politely, deliberately. He didn't fidget. He didn't rush. "When I was in Vienna," he said, "I didn't just see the forgery. I saw Kruger with Neumann. I saw the way he looked at him, like a man cornered by a truth he couldn't afford. I told the consulate what I'd seen. They buried it, said it would cause diplomatic strain, said there was no evidence." "You were silenced," Wolfe said. Lang nodded. "And I let it go. For years I told myself it was just one man's mistake, that maybe Neumann fell, that maybe Kruger was trying to get out of something worse." Wolfe leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "But you knew. Not in proof. In instinct." "Yes. And when I saw the obituary for Carlton Carew last month, when I saw the face, I knew he'd done it again. Escaped, reinvented, buried the past. So I followed the trail, quietly, until I found her. Lydia. She didn't know," Lang said. "But she deserved to. She had been raised on a lie. I thought maybe she would break it open, maybe he'd come clean for her. But I didn't expect Drexler." "No," Wolfe said. "You expected your silence to be sufficient revenge." Lang's eyes didn't move. "I didn't want revenge." "Then what?" Lang exhaled slowly. "Accountability, not from the courts, from himself." Wolfe made a low sound. Not agreement, not dismissal. Just thought embodied. I asked, "What now?" Lang stood. "Nothing. You've done what I couldn't. You exposed it. All of it." "You still haven't told her," I said. "No," Lang said, "because it's not my place to. He owes her that, and if he doesn't, if he lets her go without truth, then he dies the way he lived, unwilling to face what he made of other people." He walked to the door, paused, and looked at Wolfe. "You were the only one who could do it without losing your footing." "Not the only one," Wolfe replied, "but the only one paid in equilibrium." Lang nodded once and left. I closed the door behind him and didn't speak until I was back in the office. "You believe him?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "You believe Kruger pushed Neumann?" "I believe Neumann threatened something Kruger couldn't afford, and I believe Kruger chose himself. That is not uncommon. It is merely tragic." I sat, crossed my arms, and stared at the fire. "He should have gone to prison." "Possibly. Instead, he gets a reunion and a second chance." Wolfe looked at me. "And if he squanders it?" I didn't answer. He added, "Justice, Archie, is rarely clean. But truth, once exposed, cannot be easily buried again. That is what Drexler misjudged. That is what Kruger fears." I stood and walked to the window. The street was quiet. A few snowflakes drifted down under the lamplight like dust in a cathedral. Lang should have come back sooner. "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "But timing is the domain of guilt and grief, not logic." I turned to him. "You think Lydia will ever really forgive him?" He closed his eyes. "I think she already has, in the way children forgive without understanding, in the hope that even broken things can still tell the time." Fritz came in then quietly to collect the empty glasses. Wolfe waved a hand. "That will be all, Fritz." Fritz hesitated, then said, "A letter arrived for you." "Hand delivered." "No." "Return address." Wolfe took it and examined the envelope. Thick paper. Neat writing. I watched him slit it open. He read it silently, then passed it to me. "Mr. Wolfe, I have left the house. He is staying. We are not beginning again. We are ending it properly. Thank you for the dignity of a complete story. L.C." I set the letter down and looked at Wolfe. "She's leaving him. She's giving him the space to face what he never did," Wolfe said. "That is more than most receive." I picked up the fire poker and nudged the embers. Outside, the snow fell without urgency. Inside, the case was closed. The room was warm, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't have a single note left to write. Just the silence and the fire. The next morning, the brownstone felt unnaturally still, like a curtain had fallen and nobody was left to applaud. Wolfe remained upstairs longer than usual, presumably coaxing orchids into obedient bloom while I occupied myself with the practicalities, finalizing reports, returning borrowed files, and clearing the last threads from a web that had already ensnared more people than it had killed. In the quiet moments between phone calls, I kept hearing Lydia's words from the letter. "We are not beginning again. We are ending it properly." That line stuck in my head like a loose nail in a floorboard. Small but impossible to ignore. Around 11, Saul Panzer rang the bell. Fritz showed him in without ceremony, and I met him in the office. He was dressed as usual, plain suit, polished shoes, expression unreadable unless you knew what to look for. He took the red chair without being asked. "I have something," he said, "but I don't know if it matters anymore." "If it didn't, you wouldn't have brought it," I replied. He slid a folder across the desk. Wolfe entered just then, his footsteps slow but precise. He took his chair, glanced at the folder, then at Saul. "Proceed," Wolfe said. Saul opened the file and pulled out a single photograph. Grainy, black and white, clearly from an old surveillance source. It showed 3 men outside a hotel, their faces partially obscured. One was Kruger, another, unmistakably younger, was Drexler, and the third. "That's Lang," I said, before Saul could finish the thought. "Yes," Saul said, "that's Lang." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "The photograph is authentic?" "Vienna, late 1986. Part of an old Austrian intelligence archive that got digitized last year. Someone filed a low-level report naming all 3 men as part of a known antiquities network. The file was dismissed, never followed up, but it puts Lang deeper in the circle than he let on." I stood, hands on hips, staring at the photo. "He said he was just a consular clerk," I murmured. "He was more than that," Saul said. "Whether he was complicit or just an observer, he wasn't uninvolved." Wolfe closed his eyes. Lang positioned himself carefully, not just as a witness, but as the one pure man in a story of compromise. "He brought the case to us," I pointed out. "Yes," Wolfe said, "but only once it served him. He let us burn Drexler. He let Kruger face his daughter, and he walked away with his hands appearing clean." Saul didn't speak. He didn't need to. The photo had already said everything. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Do we know where Lang is now?" "Gone," Saul said. "Checked out of his apartment, no forwarding address. Bank account closed. If he left the country, he didn't do it through normal channels." Wolfe gave a low, dissatisfied hum. "A ghost creates another ghost." I said, "You think he orchestrated the whole thing?" "No," Wolfe said. "But I think he knew exactly what would happen once the match was struck. He used us to close a ledger only he remembered." I sat slowly, and we let him. "We did what we do," Wolfe said. The truth was revealed. The threat was neutralized. The past was exhumed. "But not all of it," I said. "No," Wolfe agreed. "Some remains buried, perhaps where it belongs." Saul stood. "I can keep looking." "No," Wolfe said. "Let it be. Lang has chosen his silence. Whether it is earned or not, it is complete." Saul nodded once and left. Wolfe turned to the fire. It was low now, embers glowing faintly under the grate. He reached for his brandy but didn't sip it. "We are often asked," he said, "to separate the guilty from the innocent, but this case reminds us. There are those who do neither. They simply wait." I said nothing. There was nothing to add. Lang hadn't vanished. He had receded, like a tide that takes years to return, and when it does, changes the coastline without warning. The rest of the day passed without interruption. Kramer sent a note that Drexler had confessed to everything under the threat of extradition. Interpol was involved now, and a handful of museums were quietly preparing statements about stolen provenance and unexpected rediscoveries. Wolfe ignored it all. He had no appetite for aftershocks. That night, just before closing down for the evening, I found a small envelope slipped under the vestibule door. No stamp, no return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Inside was a single sheet of cream paper. It read, "The past belongs to those who survive it. She'll be fine. GL." I brought it to Wolfe without a word. He read it, folded it, burned it in the fireplace. Then he turned to me and said, "Archie, I believe we'll have veal tomorrow. With morels. Perhaps a proper bottle of Saint-Emilion." I nodded. "Any cases in the meantime?" "None," he said, "worthy of digestion." And that was that. The house went quiet again. The world outside resumed its movement, and upstairs, in the rooms that always stayed warm no matter the weather, something like peace returned. It never lasted. But that night, it was enough. The day after Lang's final note arrived and turned to ash in Wolfe's fireplace, the brownstone began its slow return to normal, or at least the version of normal we'd trained it to accept. The front door stopped rattling with unresolved tension. The air in the office resumed its usual blend of polish, ink, and old upholstery. And Fritz, relieved of feeding guests with unknowable motives, finally returned to his preferred mood. Calm tyranny over the kitchen. For Wolfe, normal meant not discussing the case again. Not Lang, not Drexler, not Kruger or his daughter, not even Kramer's faintly congratulatory phone call that had arrived that morning, muttering something about a commendation Wolfe would decline and a quote Kramer refused to attribute. Wolfe's silence on the matter wasn't neglect, it was punctuation. But for me, normal takes a little longer to settle in. Call it habit, call it reflex, call it the itch that comes after too many questions finally have answers, and you don't know what to do with your hands anymore. That afternoon, I found myself in the office flipping through my own notes, looking for threads. Not the loose kind, those had all been tied off, but the type that linger, like half-whispered names in hotel lobbies or three men standing just out of focus in an old surveillance photograph. Wolfe caught me looking, of course. He always did. "You are seeking meaning," he said without looking up from his book, "where only aftermath remains." "Maybe," I said, closing the notebook. "But you've got to admit, it's rare we get all the players on stage and still leave wondering who was writing the script." He didn't answer, which, as ever, meant I was dangerously close to the truth. So I pushed. "Lang," I said. He knew exactly what would happen when he walked through our door. "Yes." "And Drexler. He didn't just want silence, he wanted possession. Of Kruger's past, of Lydia's future, yes. And Kruger himself?" Wolfe sighed, finally lowering his book. A man who spent his life avoiding punishment, only to find that shame, once inherited by his daughter, became the harsher sentence. "Think he learned anything? That is not my concern." "But you knew," I said, "from the beginning, that the case wasn't about a missing body or a forged death certificate. It was about identity, about how long a lie can live inside someone before it starts leaking into everyone around them." Wolfe stared at me for a moment. "Very good, Archie. You may have an extra portion of calf's liver tomorrow." I bowed. My reward for amateur psychology. Your reward, Wolfe said, for knowing when to stop chasing ghosts. There was a quiet beat between us then, just the ticking of the clock on the credenza and the gentle creak of the house settling into the season. Eventually I asked, "Do you think Lydia will talk to him again?" Wolfe paused, then replied, "One cannot stand on the grave of a father and demand perfection, but one can stand there and expect truth. If he can offer that, perhaps she will listen." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. I stood, stretched, and crossed to the window. Outside, the street was wearing winter now in full measure, glossed with frost, traffic slower, sounds muffled by the cold. The world had moved on. Drexler was in custody. The ledger was back where it belonged, under official seal. Kruger, real name and all, had agreed to a quiet testimony in exchange for immunity and would live out his remaining years somewhere in Vermont. Lydia had declined to follow. And Lang? Well, Lang was a question we weren't meant to answer. He'd stepped into the story long enough to break it open, then stepped out again, the kind of character who exists only to remind the others of what they're trying to forget. Wolfe stood, finally, and made for the dining room. "Archie," he said over his shoulder, "join me." I followed, naturally. That's how these things end. Not with handcuffs or gunfire, not with speeches or salutes, but with dinner, with order restored, with knowledge served at room temperature and justice plated in restraint. And in our line of work, that's about as satisfying as it gets, 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 as it gets.